I'm here today with Amy Hoppock, Michael Kroth, and Davin Carr-Chellman, who are authors of a new book titled Framing the Moment, Haiku Conversations. Amy Hoppock is passionate about the power of vision-based planning to transform individuals and organizations. She believes in the power of questions to move people forward. Amy's taught in China, taught high schools, currently teaches classes with refugees and low-income families. Amy lives with her family in Boise, Idaho. When she isn't shuttling her kids to the golf course, she does content writing for clients and blogs at theartofpoweringdown.com. Amy has authored 3 short books, 32 Questions, Compelled by Love, and Casa is Where the Heart Is. And Amy's on the board of 52.4 and has run 24 half marathons in support of their mission to provide care for HIV/AIDS orphans in India. That's pretty amazing.
Thanks.
Michael Kroth is professor of education at the University of Idaho. He's written or co-authored 9 books, including Transforming Work, The 5 Keys to Achieving Trust, Commitment, and Passion in the Workplace, Profound Living, Essays, Images, and Poetry, and Coffee Talk, a transformational tale inspired by the imitation of Christ, written with Brian Taylor. Michael created and curates the blog site Profound Living with Michael Kroth. You can find it at profoundliving.live. Davin Carr-Chellman is the father of Asher, Jules, and Aaliyah, 3 remarkable teenagers moving far too quickly into adulthood. Don't we know that phenomenon? He stumbled into his future wife, Allie, during a lunch meeting in September 1997, and they married just a few months later, even though it took 2 Catholic priests and 1 Methodist pastor to convince her that it was a good idea. He's on the faculty of University of Dayton, and his personal and professional ambition is to be useful. He works hard at taking life seriously without taking himself too seriously. You can learn more about Davin at davincarrchellman.com. So folks, it's so wonderful to have you all here with us today.
Thank you for having us.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
I just learned a lot of stuff about Amy that I didn't know. So it's already good.
Well, we'll have to delve into all of that a little bit more deeply because you've all got very interesting and eclectic backgrounds. So congratulations on your new book. Maybe to start off, you can kind of just tell us what the origin story is for the 3 of you, for this group.
I'm going to let Michael start because he's the glue, the glue and the
inspiration,
the catalyst and inspiration.
Well, having said that, thank you. The real inspiration goes back a step further, and that's Judith Valente and Paul Quignon and Michael Beavers, who wrote a book called The Art of Pausing. And we've kept in contact with Judith throughout the time. She just wrote a new book, Paul Quignon. And they wrote a book called The Art of Pausing, which is about haikus. And so I picked up that book at a retreat. It's been, 2 or 3 years now. And in that book, I just fell in love with writing haikus. And the advice and so I started writing haikus, and I write a haiku every day. They advise, write a haiku every day as a practice. And it's turned out to be a practice for me. And another piece of advice that came from that was that you should share those haikus and share them with other people. So I said, well, who can I get together with and start sharing this information? So a friend of mine, Kelly Anderson, we started getting together, and then we invited Davin, and then we invited Amy, and so we all started getting together. And then Kelly went on to other things. She's now quite the artist, actually. But we 3 have been meeting ever since, and so we started meeting, and then we finally decided after a few months that we would get together and we'd share our haikus with each other. And I'll let probably Amy and Davin can discuss more in detail how this works, but we share haikus with each other, and based on that, we write a little narrative about each one. And then each month we get together and talk about them. And then for the last 18 months or 19 or 20 months now, we've gotten together and actually had a Zoom recording, which we record, takes about a half an hour. It's a lot of fun. And then we share that on our social media. And so from that, then we put Framing the Moment together, which is the book, and just have a ball doing it. I mean, just a ball doing it. So what have I missed, Amy and Davin?
I think you've covered it pretty well. We just share our haikus. We never have a theme. It's just open. We can write whatever haiku and share whatever haiku we want to share. And so we, send them, Davin and I send out postcards each month. I send them to Michael and to Davin. And then I have like almost 50 people that I send out haikus to. I know that Michael does too. And then it's always fun to see what kind of synergy happens especially between the three of us, because there's no plan on what we're going to write about. And so many times there's just this incredible synergy of the topic or even how we interpret each other's haikus. And I always learn more about my own poetry through my time spent with Davin and Michael. And I think we all felt as we were doing this, like we took so much away from it. That's why we started recording it. And that's why we wanted to share it. And that's why we wanted to put it in the books, because I know for all of us, like I wanted to go back and read their haibans to continue to like, what did they say? How did they phrase that? Like a practice of lectio divina almost with
Right.
the writing.
Right.
Yeah. And I want to add that, I am just really, really lucky to be able to tag along with them. Michael and Amy are inspiring. And somehow three very different people come together, and there's just a lot of fun and friendship and great chemistry. And as Amy said, incredible synergy with our ideas. Three people from very different backgrounds. Michael kind of brought us together, and it's been wonderful. And every month I'm the beneficiary of great thoughts from them. So yeah, it's at some point every month I get a postcard from each of them. And Michael is, I think, eventually going to have to start a museum for his art, because I mean that it's somewhat facetiously, but really I mean that as well authentically. He does hand drawings on his postcards that are it's magnificent folk art, and it's just wonderful. And he adds usually more haiku to the one that's the central focus, and it really encourages me to experiment and kind of stretch my own sense of what I think are pretty feeble poetic chops, from me. So it's wonderful. So yeah, so I read them, but not until I've written my haiku. So my practice is I do not read theirs until I write mine, because that to me adds to the astonishment and magnificence of what happens when we start reading them, our interpretation, our haibun with each other. And we sort of look at each other with astonishment every month and say, how on earth did our ideas complement each other so well? So then, I write an interpretation or haibun about Michael's, and one about Amy's, and one about my own, and we come together and we share them. And it's a great process, very creative for me.
So for Neanderthals like me that have got degrees in engineering and business, can one of you explain haiku to me? What are the parameters around it?
You want to go, Michael? You're the real pro.
I'm just learning. Haiku's been around for centuries, and it's originally written in Japanese by some of the great haiku writers, come from like Basho and others, write haikus, and traditionally they're 17 syllables, 5 syllables on one line, then 7 syllables, then 5 syllables. But it's not really totally true, because translating from Japanese to English, those aren't exact translations. And so people who are more expert at haiku than we are, who have really done it for a long time, they may not use these constraints. They may, it's just like an expert, just like an expert in anything. Once you know the rules, you can evolve and use them. So that's haiku. And there's a lot of haiku well beyond us. The other piece that we do is, Amy mentioned, is Haiban. And Haiban is, you write the haiku and then you write a narrative about it. And Basho was one of the most famous, and he would write about his travels. And he would write a haiku, and then he'd describe how his travels went, then he'd write a haiku. And so those are kind of what we've adopted. And Amy and Davin don't know it yet, but I just adopted a new word called Haiga, and it's the drawing that goes with it. It's the drawing that goes with it. So we're going to learn something. Well, I don't know if you all probably know it, but we're going to talk about this in our meeting this week when we have our monthly meeting. So there's so much to learn that I'll just make this point and then I'll be quiet. It's a practice. It's become a practice to me, a practice to write one every day, to write the narrative, now to draw a picture about it, to send it out to others, to talk about it and share it. And so from a practice of deepening my understanding of the world and religion in particular, both Davin and Amy bring deep spirituality, and Davin's got a degree in philosophy. Amy's going through spiritual direction. So there's a lot of depth of discussion that goes into those, which in this superficial world, Davin and I've talked about this a lot, this other stuff we've written, the shallows of the world, this is a place to go deep.
Mm-hmm.
Wow. Well, it sounds as though, this whole process for you all has been incredible learning, like on multiple dimensions. Is that accurate?
Yeah, for me, it's completely accurate. So I never thought of myself as a poet, nor I don't now think of myself as a poet, but I'm writing poetry often. And when I'm reading or studying or writing other things that I write, I'm often finding myself writing down words that rhyme or fit together into a haiku. The constraint can seem arbitrarily, restrictive, but I think the constraint of the 17 syllables, the 5, the 7, the 5, is what really has enabled me it's made it accessible to me. I think if Michael had said, let's come together and write poetry with, no constraints at all, I would have been probably intimidated and wouldn't have done very well. But the constraint provides just great structure for me. And that really is to me, that's a key to the meaning making of the process. So it's relational with these two wonderful people. And it's the constraints of the form are part of the meaning making. And I'll say this and then I'll be quiet. The idea of practices is so important. I just, in some research and writing Michael and I have done, we've really focused on practices as a real key to learning and growth, and adopting this as a practice has been a real opportunity for me.
I think for me, I a few years ago, I had this mantra that was just really deep in my heart. It was just smaller and deeper. Like it just kind of was this guiding thing that just kept coming to me. I feel like the world is so much about wider and, more, build a bigger platform, bigger and wider. And I felt like the voice in my heart was smaller and deeper. And I was telling somebody about this practice of writing haiku, and then it came up this mantra in my heart of smaller and deeper. And I had never made the connection. They're like, wait a minute, haiku is a smaller and deeper practice. Like you are investing your time in this practice with the constraints of 5, 7, 5. And, it was just this really neat connection that for me has really been how to, I'm training to become a spiritual director. And I was thinking about how haiku relates to that, because haiku is seeing something and finding the very essence of it. Like you have to drill down so deep to really understand what it's about, and then translate that into 17 syllables. And that's what, spiritual direction and listening to people is about, is taking all of the words and then finding that essence. And well, as the name of our book, put a frame around the moment. So it's really been a transformative process. And of course, working with these two gentlemen is like, I just feel so lucky. Like, how did I get to be in this group?
You're the smartest of us all. We shouldn't get past this little moment, Brian, without mentioning Amy's newsletter. Is it called a newsletter that comes out every Sunday? Called Smaller and Deeper, and she just has this marvelous. I read it every either Sunday night or Monday. It's just marvelous. But from a more contemplative perspective or a more spiritual perspective, framing the moment and moving into that present moment is what, just to build on what Amy just said, is what this is all about. Really, what is this? And from people who are really experienced at haiku, it's really, how do I pay attention? Mm-hmm. And a lot of haikus are really supposed to be based on the season that's out there and observing and not judging or explaining, but just being able to observe what is. And so from a contemplative perspective, it just really, for me anyway, it's really helped my abilities to kind of be there. This is what a leaf looks like. This is what this is what the snow melting is. This is, so there's a lot of that goes on. And so this is what our sessions are like, Brian. We just chat. Maybe you'll get a question in somewhere. I'm not sure.
Well, a couple things. One, Amy, you have to send me one of your newsletters so I can subscribe to it.
Absolutely.
If you could, please. One of the things that's clear in listening to you guys is that a big part of the value has been your interaction and doing this together, as opposed to if one of you just kind of went off on your own and did writing and then never discussed it or never interacted with each other. Am I perceiving that accurately?
Absolutely. I mean, I wouldn't have stuck with haiku writing if it weren't for the structure that comes from, and just these relationships like you've just identified of, I don't want to let them down, so I keep paying attention, and it's just become a part of how I look through the world. Like sometimes we talk on our things about how we walk around counting on our fingers out syllables. Like you see something and you start counting off to see what the syllables are and how you're going to fit that into a haiku. But having a group has made it sustainable, I think.
Yeah. So for new folks that have not really, delved into this yet, I mean, is that the way you suggest that they do, is form a little group to do it together, or how? What advice do you have for newbies?
I think Michael and Amy can probably talk more articulately about this than I can, but the first thing I would say is just do it. I mean, it's the advice to anyone who wants to write. Thinking about writing doesn't ever get it done. So reading and writing. So just write some poetry, write some haiku, and find friends who do. But Michael and Amy.
Mm-hmm. I think too, I've learned from Michael, the practice of, I make these postcards and we send them out, and that's it's a practice of generosity, of sharing. And that has been, it's made me braver about sharing my words, because it feels really vulnerable sometimes to write poetry, to write haiku. But the more I do it, the more confident I am about just, whether it's good or bad, like it was good enough for me, and I'm going to share it, and I'm going to put it out there. And it's been fun. I didn't know Michael and Davin before we started this process. So as kind of, it's been fun to meet new people, and we've developed a completely different kind of relationship. I've said before, we've been in person together one time a few years ago. And
wow.
The rest of it is just been, we have developed a relationship through haiku writing, and you just know people at a different level. Really, it's kind of weird, but good.
And what's really interesting too, I mean, I'll just add to that. So I first met Amy at a retreat at the Episcopal Church?
Uh-huh. Yeah.
At the Episcopal Church, it was a day-long retreat. And so we didn't have haikus going on then, but when that started happening, I thought of her because she writes, she does, I just thought Amy would be perfect. but kind of what really happens is that we learn so much about each other. We know just from the high guns that we write, we know that Amy's been through this or Davin's been through that, or there's something that important's happened in our lives. And Davin really does have a philosophical background, which I don't have. And so, if we're going to talk about Aristotle, it's not going to be me, it's going to, I'm going to be talking about something else. But he brings that perspective, one of many perspectives he brings, and Amy brings, so it's a real learning. And just the last thing about practices is that these are, the meta practice is really writing the haiku or kind of creating this haiku experience. But there's a writing practice, there is a narrative practice, there's a generosity practice of sending things out to people. Sometimes anonymously, which is anonymous giving. Sometimes people don't know who it's coming from, and there's a practice of developing relationships. So there's more than, there's more than that. There's developing a spiritual. We're all three very, I'd say, spiritual types.
To add to that as well, so Michael and Amy both touched on this, but they both really have a haiku ministry. It's one way to think about it. It's an active engagement with bringing something deeper and richer to people who may or may not want it or need it, but they're getting it, and they send those out in the mail every month, and it's really wonderful. It really is. And I know it's a blessing to people who receive them, because I get that blessing as well. And it's great. And I think Amy's comment about courage. So thinking about the tentacles of the practice and how they start to grow out. So it's not just writing haiku. It now it's finding your voice. And Amy talked about courage. My biggest constraint, my biggest hesitation to starting my own haiku ministry is I don't have that courage yet, that Amy and Michael have to really share it in the same ways that they share it. So I'm getting there. I'm a work in progress.
Well, one of the things that's really fascinating, I just love about what you have done is what Michael said a moment ago, that the three of you have only met once. And here you have this incredibly deep relationship with each other. And I just love that because, more and more as humans, we're finally getting past the geographical boundaries that have been so high, right, mm-hmm. for the history of mankind until now, right? Mm-hmm. You've got the postcards, you've got the email, you've got Zoom, right? You've got phone calls. You've got so many ways now of communicating with each other in deep and meaningful ways that allow community to be built without having to be all in the same room or all in the same town or whatever. Yeah. And I just think that is an incredibly powerful thing. And you guys are a really good example of that.
And it's interesting. Thank you, Brian. Thank you so much for that. The other interesting thing, just to add to that, is now we have a book. Mm-hmm. And so this book is not designed to make us any money whatsoever. And we're not out to make money off a book. But now I've given this book to a number of people already. And we'll keep doing that. So it's part of, just, and then we've got, this book ties right into our videos. We can see the videos that we've done for 18 months by looking in here and checking out the cards and everything. So it's like, I don't know, it's holistic or something. It's like there's all this.
Different elements play off each other, right? We wouldn't be having this interview had there not been a book, right? That's just an impetus and a focal point, to draw attention to everything else, right, that you all are doing, that you all described. And that's, a very important.
I'm hoping Ed Sullivan calls pretty quick and just asks us, my era. I'm sorry, Amy. Sullivan, maybe not.
I really hope he does not call me.
That would be a different experience.
So it sounds like you probably have all kind of compared notes amongst each other in terms of how the haiku practice maybe differs for each of you. Do you want to each comment a little bit on that?
Sure. We have, it's interesting. We've definitely talked about this a little bit. For me, I started out, at first, we kind of had agreed that we were going to write a haiku every day. I did that for a while, and then life got busy. So my practice is really, it's almost like a practice of Lectio Divina, of I just read, I read a lot. And when I read until I see a line that I always like to say sparkles up. And when that line sparkles for me, that's when I stop and then try and dig deeper. And that's usually, most of my haikus come from something that I've read, sometimes from something that I've experienced in nature. But so I don't write a haiku every day, but I'm constantly keeping in mind when I'm reading, like, where is my next haiku going to come from? And it engages me in my reading practice in a different way. So that's my practice, is through reading.
And Amy is too humble to say it, but she reads one book a week.
She's amazing.
Good for her.
She is such a role model for me.
Yeah.
It's tremendous. My practice is changing and evolving. It is a daily practice. It isn't a daily haiku, but it's part of my spiritual disciplines every day in the morning. And I think Michael and Amy have seen that a lot of my haiku really I'm bad at sticking to the purpose of haiku and, thinking about the natural world and that kind of thing. It tends to become more abstract for me. I tend to relate it to that spiritual reading that I'm doing, or my prayer life. And they reflect that. If you read the haiku that I've written, they're often about Psalms, and a little more biographical, relating my thoughts and concerns to what's happening in my life.
And I'm just to be the third person here. So I started writing a haiku a day, and then I have been doing it ever since. And so I've got hundreds. I mean, I've got maybe 1,000. I've been doing it for 3 years. And I do it almost every day. I mean, there's a day or two I may miss just because of whatever, but it is a practice. And it's part of, like Davin was talking about, for me, it's part of my morning practice of reading, contemplating, writing a haiku, several of those kind of things, which I do every single day. One of the articles, Davin and I are both professors, and so he works at the University of Dayton, I work at the University of Idaho, and we wrote a scholarly article. Our very first one was about spiritual disciplines and deep learning, what we call profound learning. And so we are, and I think all three of us are, although we don't really talk about it in this group much, really feel the importance of those spiritual disciplines, of prayer, solitude, all the ones that people like Richard Foster and Dallas Willard talk about. And maybe even Frederick Buechner, right?
Right. Well, what you said a little while ago about paying attention certainly resonated with my reading of his work.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
And speaking of which, I kind of did this brief introduction of all three of you and then jumped right into the book. But from a vocational standpoint, how does your haiku practice relate into your background and your current work? I don't care who starts with that. Amy, you want to go first?
Sure. I mean, I kind of hit on it a little bit. I'm training to become a spiritual director. And so for me, the haiku has really overlapped with the practice of the ministry of spiritual direction, which is really the conversation of three and just creating space for people and being an active listener to draw them, to their understanding of God and how God is moving in their lives. And so haiku has, been an important part of and practice for that. So, and just learning, I think, I've said this too, but to be bold and courageous in my writing. I've always been a writer, I've always writing, but taking the step from writing in my journal or writing, and then sharing writing can sometimes be a big step. And this has been an important part of my journey of learning to be a writer, I think, as well.
Yeah, but how about you?
For me, the most creative things in my life have largely been somatic. So growing up an athlete, played baseball in college, singing, those are things for me that have been my creative outlets. So writing has usually been something that has been a requirement, part of part of work. And I didn't really see it very much as a creative process. So I think that this has really embellished my sense of what I'm able to do in terms of a creative person, outlets for that. Mary Oliver has a book about how to write poetry, and I bought a couple of other books about how to write poetry, over the months here, because I thought, I'm really enjoying the haiku. I'd like to see other ways I could express myself, through words. I can't draw for anything. Otherwise, I would love to draw. I mean, it's terrible. My stick figures are hardly recognizable. So this is one of my few opportunities, I think, to really engage that. And it's, like I said, it's the personal and professional growth. It's been great.
It's so funny listening. So I've said up until the last bit of time that I can't draw. I'm colorblind. I have a degree in theater arts, which is performing arts, right? So I've got that, but I've never had hardly any interest in visual arts, just because I'm colorblind. And so I think it's a block. And so lately, these last few years, I've really developed an appreciation for visual arts. And what's interesting about, well, there's a whole lot of things that's interesting, but one thing that's interesting is that, like Amy says about taking chances. So taking chances with writing, and now I'm taking chances with trying to draw. I'm trying to draw and learn how to draw. And now I'm taking a calligraphy class so that I can learn how to do that. And so if we think of lifelong learning and really never stopping learning and thinking, well, how can I try something new? That's what learning's all about, taking a step, falling, standing up. How can I do that? It's just fun. And it's risk-free with this group of 3 people in particular. You can take a risk and you can look a little silly and it's, trying stuff out. Mm-hmm. Regarding my vocation, I'm at that point right now in my career, which is kind of the final part of the arc of a career, of a paid career. And so all this is kind of leading into next phases, the writing, the art, the haiku, and doing that with Davin from a scholarly perspective, because we're studying something really related to profound learning and deep learning, just related to contemplative work and practices. This is directly related to that. And so I've been able in my last few years of my career to really combine all these things to my scholarly interests and also avocational interests. And so, it's when those things all line up and they combine. I love my professional life and doing this kind of stuff.
One of the real occupational hazards of being a faculty member at a university, particularly research-driven university, is getting a little too stuck on your role as an expert. And, I think, a lot of faculty really get stuck there and lose the sense of adventure that comes from being afraid, getting into spots that make you feel uncomfortable, where you've got to be courageous and no longer the expert, and you kind of have to fess up. So I wrote a bad poem. A lot of my poems are bad. That's just how it is.
Too judgmental. That's too judgmental.
But that is, for me, that's very empowering and growth oriented. Maybe I should start drawing too. Who knows?
Well, I think all of us can use a shot of humility every once in a while, right? So it seems like that's a good driving force for that.
Yeah,
absolutely. So before we move on too far, I want to mention that this becomes kind of not a family project, but a family of friends project. So the picture on the front is taken by my friend Vincent Fortunato, and so it So you look at this picture and the little tree on the inside as well. He took that picture. Judith Valente, who was the starter of this whole project, wrote the foreword. And so these become labors of love. They're not just, and Amy is the one who kind of put the whole thing together. I mean, she's the one who's got the skills to put things together.
I mean, it's a beautiful book.
Thank you.
It's very nice, very elegant,
Thank
kind of not simplistic is not the right term, but the design of it, is that way. Simple.
That's
Thank
all
you.
Amy. That's all Amy. And yeah, so haikus are supposed to be elegant, right?
There you go.
A very simple sort of thing, and you got it. Thanks.
So, I have to ask y'all, of course, what's next, right? I mean, you're obviously so heavily involved in this and, so passionate about it. And, you've now accomplished this book. So are there going to be more books? Are there going to be other forms of communication that we haven't discussed yet? Maybe do some video readings of, some of your work and share that way, in addition to postcards and emails or whatever, what are your thoughts about some experimentation or growth in other directions?
That's such a good question. We definitely are planning to keep, maybe once a year, put together our past year's work and figuring out how to do that, because I think for us, it's just a good record of what we've had and the journey of where we've been. I don't know. I mean, there's some good ideas that you just mentioned.
Well, we're already, our very first presentation on this will be at the Garden City Public Library. I'm big fans of libraries, public libraries where, they're pillars of a democratic society, I think. And so love to present at public libraries. So we'll talk about it there. And if we get other invitations or other people would like us to come talk, I know we will, just because, as you can tell, we're kind of passionate about it.
Obviously. But I would really encourage you to think about reading, do a video reading of them because, for one thing, they're bite-sized, right? They're a good length, that's not too long. You can finish an entire piece, right? An entire thought and focus area pretty, succinctly.
Mm-hmm.
It also, just like, Frederick Buechner's work, this has forced yourself to be succinct and profound at the same time, right? To complete, a whole deep thought, relatively briefly.
Yeah.
And video, of course, is just increasingly attractive to folks from a consumption perspective. So, just an idea.
Yeah.
When I read The Art of Pausing, there's 100 of haikus and narratives that Judith and her authors wrote. And there's a haiku on one page and there's a narrative on the other page. And I would read one a day. And so it took me 100 days, actually 99 days to go through and do it. And then I did it again. And so a book like this is the same. You could read one of these every day or every, a period of time. Because like you say, it's short. And then I think, and it may just be my ego talking, but I think there's a lot of food for thought there. If people wanted to find some time to kind of think about various perspectives that are brought up.
Mm-hmm.
Well, another aspect of this is it's very similar, structure and consumption wise to devotionals,
Mm-hmm.
right? So, all the publishing houses are always looking for new devotionals, particularly as it relates to things like Lent or Advent or what have you, so that's another potential.
We're going to be looking for a publishing house. So just keep that. We'd love to have, we self-publish this book, but we would love to have a publisher for our next and future books. So if anybody picks up on that.
Good.
Thank you.
Well, I know I'm not a publisher, but I know a few of them, as Amy knows. But anyway, well, this has just been such a fascinating conversation. It's certainly enlightening for me and a great learning experience. I really hope that a lot of folks get to benefit from this. And I want to thank you all for sharing with us all of your insights and all of your skills.
We could not be more grateful that you've spent time with us. Thank you so much for that and for this whole venue that you bring the works of books to others.
Thank you very much.
Yes, thank you.
Well, it's absolutely my pleasure, and I appreciate being able to work with people like you all. So please stay in touch. Please keep us posted with, wherever things head next. And, we'll do the same.
Thank you.
Thank you, Brian.
The name of the book is, let me get it to Framing the Moment, Haiku Conversations. Amy Hoppock, Michael Kroth, and Davin Carr-Chellman. So you can go to each one of their websites and find out more. Subscribe to Amy's email newsletter. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. So thanks again to all of you.
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.